College Football with Sam primarily covers Big Ten football, but occasionally I will go out of my way to cover college football topics that are outside of the Big Ten Conference, outside of the Midwest, the Northeast, and now the West Coast. The Big Ten is truly a sea to shining sea conference now. Ironically, same thing with the Atlantic Coast Conference. But today I want to go out of my own way to look into the SEC. And just to say that I think it's pretty obvious that Billy Napier's time is up and that he needs to be fired. He needs to pack his bags. Scott Strickland, Florida's athletic director, should probably be fired as well, given the fact that he hired Billy Napier. And from what I have read from Florida fans and what they have expressed, I also think Scott Strickland hired Dan Mullen, who was successful in a few of his seasons but couldn't recruit, fell apart at the end, and then fired Mullen for Napier, which firing Mullen may have been the correct move and probably was, but hiring Napier in his place evidently was not. And Billy Napier does have a massive buyout that is over $20 million. So certainly Florida, they have the money if they want to commit to it, but that doesn't mean that doesn't hurt. And I look at Florida football in a similar way to how I have witnessed the lifting up of Scott Frost at Nebraska. A great coach at the Group of Five level, was hired, praised by the media and also by the fan base and many outside observers as being a home run hire. And as the years went on and on, there was a lot of excuse making. And because of the talent that resided in Lincoln, Nebraska, there was this expectation that eventually he would just get things right. Give him enough time, let him finally earn a close win or a good win, and he'll get this thing rolling. Well, the problem is patience dried up. They waited. I mean, heck, I even fell for it. I'm known for being the guy who picked Nebraska to win the Big Ten West in 2022 and earn 10 wins and be a top 10 team. And they were anything but. They went 4-8, 3-6 in Big Ten Conference play. They were not good. Not good one bit. And I look at Florida and Billy Napier, and I'm a guy, granted, who this Saturday cares more about Nebraska versus Northern Iowa than Georgia and Kentucky, even though the latter is a much more critical matchup, and the average team in Georgia versus Kentucky is far better than the average team in Nebraska versus Northern Iowa. But again, I primarily cover the Big Ten, so I like to be an expert and at times even a genius on all Big Ten teams and not just looking at the whole sport from a bird's eye view equally. I'm knowledgeable about the SEC, ACC, and Big 12, but not even close to the degree that I am knowledgeable about the Big Ten. But I watched segments of this game, parts of it, and it was just unbelievable. I mean, Florida is poorly coached. Florida is undisciplined. They're uncreative. They are inefficient. Use any adjective you want to basically describe bleh or vomit or something that is just out of this world, disgusting and wrong. A football team that is top 15 year over year in team talent per 24/7 Sports team talent composite, which compiles every recruit on the roster in their high school recruiting ranking, averages it out, and then basically spits out a talent power rating in a certain sense. I think that's the best way to describe it. Not a power rating to try and determine like how good a team is or how Vegas would treat each team if they were to, for example, put Texas A&M versus Florida on a neutral field. How much would A&M be favored by? Not that type of power ranking, but like who has the most talented roster per high school recruiting rankings, which, whether you like it or not, do have some accuracy to them. A 5-star and a 4-star are more likely to go to the NFL and be elite players than a 3-star. But Florida is an example of one of these teams that has all this talent. In fact, their top half in the SEC in team talent, and yet because of coaching, they suck. Florida State is an abject embarrassment, but one of the only fan bases in the state of Florida that's struggling to laugh at Florida State's grotesque performance are the Florida Gators. Congratulations. Florida's sole win is against Samford, who stinks. And they have lost to Texas A&M by 13 points, allowed 33 points. 26 of them were offensive because Florida State and Graham Mertz threw, a classic pick six. But they surrendered 26 offensive points to a backup quarterback and a team who is in year one of their offensive system, year one with Mike Elko. And look, they couldn't do anything against Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is a pretty good defense, maybe a near elite to elite defense, but I think it's similar to Iowa's defense this year, Michigan's defense this year, where they're not indestructible. It's not like Michigan's defense last season or Georgia's in 2021 or Ohio State's last year and maybe Ohio State's this year, where it was pretty indestructible to big plays and gaping holes. You had to play a very efficient and purposeful game against Ohio State, Michigan, Iowa of last year, Georgia of the previous few years to move on their defense. It's not the case for Notre Dame in my mind, or Michigan this year, or Iowa this year. Georgia's defense looks better. We'll have to see where it goes. Florida's defense is terrible. It's objectively terrible. Gave up nearly 500 yards to Texas A&M, 27 first downs. The defense couldn't get off the field. That's in part because of the offense, but also because the defense just didn't make stops. A&M had, I think, close to 20 minutes of possession by the half. And I'm reviewing this game to just show you how dire the situation is. Napier must be fired. He must be fired after this game. The earlier, the better. You get everything out of the way. All the ugly, all the pus, all the necrosis, it's gone. It's out of the way. And whether it's Lane Kiffin, whether it's Eli Drinkwitz, whether it's Chris Kleiman, and any other name that you can think of, go out and hire someone who can win. And someone who can not just recruit, even though all three of those names that I mentioned are not known to be top 10 recruiters. I will tell you this. Development, you heard it here first. Or you probably have heard it in other places, but I don't praise recruiting as much as many others do. Development matters more. Kirby Smart and Georgia are elite, not just because they recruit at an elite level, they develop at an elite level. If you have good recruiting, elite recruiting, you are in no way guaranteed success. In no way. You just aren't. Look at Tom Herman at Texas. I know Billy Napier wasn't recruiting at an elite level here at Florida, but he recruited at a great level. And look where that's gotten him, because there was no coaching. There wasn't. If you have only 3 stars and a few 4 stars, but you're very well coached and developed, you won't win a title, but your floor is that much higher. And maybe if you get just a generational quarterback, or you get a bunch of experienced players on your team, maybe you can break the rule, be the exception, and win a national title in spite of that talent disadvantage. Washington nearly did it last year. TCU got to a title game without a blue chip ratio of 50%. Michigan last year and Florida State in 2013 were barely over the 50% blue chip ratio. They won national titles. And I just look at Florida, and Urban Meyer won 2 national titles. Steve Spurrier had a dynasty. You can win at Florida. You can. Florida is not this broken program. They're not a permanently regional program. That's not what Florida is. It's the same thing with Miami. It's the same thing with Florida State. You get the right coach, the right staff, with the talent in that area, you'll win. You will. Meyer showed it. Spurrier showed it. Mullen was a terrible recruiter, and he beat Georgia once, appeared in the SEC championship game once, and won New Year's Six Bowls. So you don't have to have Nick Saban at Florida to compete for college football playoff spots and wins. Florida is not, the bar at Florida is not like that low at a base level, and I hope that makes sense. Like, you don't need to have the number one head coach to even have a tiny sliver of a chance to win it all. You don't. You absolutely do not. We all know that Nick Saban was a better head coach than Urban Meyer, and Urban Meyer beat him in 2008, in part because Saban was still building his program, but also because Urban built his program into an effective machine. And then they rematched in 2009, and that time Alabama got the better of Florida, and not the other way around. So get someone who can coach, who has the capability, if he surrounds himself with good staffers, to recruit and really utilize the Florida talent. Because Lane Kiffin, Eli Drinkwitz, and even, you'll probably hate this, but I mentioned his name already, Chris Kleiman. Keep in mind that Urban Meyer came from Utah and dominated in Florida. And Utah in the Mountain West, when not Kyle Whittingham, also Kyle Whittingham was there too. He coached when they were in the Mountain West. But Urban Meyer, that conference back then was probably at a similar level to what the Big 12 is like now, where they can occasionally field the team that is near elite or elite, but they're basically like a high-level G5 conference in a sense. And I think the Big 12 overall is a little deeper than that, but I don't want to get too off track. What I'm trying to say is the coaches I mentioned will automatically recruit better if they surround themselves with the correct staff, because they're in an environment that is that much more talent-rich. Florida is more talent-rich than Mississippi. It's more talent-rich than Missouri, more talent-rich, obviously, than Kansas. And there are probably other head coaches who I just haven't mentioned because I don't want to sound like a complete fool. Like, I'm not going to bring up Lance Leipold. He's very, very old, and Kansas does not look as good as I expected them to this year. In fact, they look quite terrible. I'm not going to bring up, like, Matt Campbell. He's probably an Iowa State lifer, and I don't think he has the ceiling to make Florida content. I'm not going to bring up, like, Mike Norvell or Shane Beamer or a G5 head coach, because I think Florida needs to go with someone who has some type of experience at the Power 4, Power 5 level. Like, look at Fran Brown at Syracuse. Fran Brown, as far as I can tell, is way better than Billy Napier, because that coaching at the Power 4 level at a powerhouse like Georgia put him that further ahead than someone who's just coaching in the G5 to beat a bunch of schools that don't have like a single 4-star on their roster, or a 4-star who didn't pan out at their Power 4 school and had to transfer to said G5 schools, like in the Sun Belt or in the Mountain West. And I'm not saying that G5 conferences are worthless here, but they're clearly at a different level. Clearly at a different level than the Power 4, now more than ever. So whether it's a coordinator, whether it is a head coach, keep it in the Power 4. Florida has the money, they have the resources, they have the talent, the history, the evidence that they can win big. Fire Napier, get it over with. Coming from a Big Ten guy who watched Scott Frost, who fell for Scott Frost, admittedly, and Trev Alberts made the right decision after that 1-2 start, after an embarrassing loss to Georgia Southern, which, granted, A&M's no Georgia Southern, they're way better, but Florida got blown out by Miami, and now you wonder, like, is Florida really so bad that maybe Miami's overrated, which is not a good look for the Gators. And A&M, honestly, dominated them. That game was not close. 20-0 at half. Game was over unless A&M was going to pull some massive choke job. And they didn't, and they weren't going to, because they're coached by Mike Elko, who, in my mind, is like the type of head coach at the bare minimum, and I think Elko's really good, that Florida should be going after. Someone who has proven success at the Power 4, someone who knows how to develop, who knows how to put his players in a position to win. So, get rid of Napier. That's the first solution to all of this. Get him out of here. He's not good. His team sucks. The product speaks for the head coach. It does, especially when you're 3 years deep and you have this much talent. Undisciplined, not physical, weak consequentially, boring, uncreative, and these 2 losses in conference play in the SEC have been at home. Imagine how bad the margins will be when they go on the road. Yikes. That's all I got to say here, and thank you so much for watching, guys. If you want to support the channel, I forgot, because I was passionate, to ask you guys to like the channel, or like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell. Please do those things. Like, subscribe, share the video around, click the notification bell, and comment who you think Florida should hire as their next head coach down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Nebraska Rascal for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Kind of Little OH, Ismar, Tyler Nye, and Jolton Cush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being all conference members. If you want access to my weekly picks for college football, I picked Texas A&M to win this game. I picked them to cover the spread. I thought it was a no-brainer that they'd come in and just kind of humiliate Florida in one way or another. Didn't necessarily expect 20-0 at the half, but I expected close to a double-digit win victory or a double-digit win victory. If you want access to those picks, and believe me, I get some wrong, I do get some right. It's for fun, but I'm pretty good at what I do. So check out my Patreon page and sign up as a Heisman or All-American member, and you'll get access to those picks. Thank you so much for watching. The link to my Patreon page and also my merchandise store, if you want to wear College Football with Sam merchandise, the links to those are in the description and also in the pinned comment. Have a phenomenal day, guys. Go Aggies and go Gators.